I hadn't heard my mother's voice in almost 10 years. No calls, no messages, not even on holidays. To her, I simply disappeared. So when my phone rang that night and I saw an unfamiliar hospital number, my first thought wasn't worry, it was confusion. I almost didn't answer. The voice on the other end didn't ask if I was her child. They already knew my full name. They said my mother had been brought in unexpectedly. They said her condition was serious. And then they said something that made my hands go cold. She asked for you, not your sister. You. That didn't make sense, because my mother cut me off years ago. She chose my sister over me. She believed her lies, and she made it very clear I was no longer welcome in her life. I wasn't invited to family gatherings. I wasn't told when relatives passed away. I wasn't even mentioned anymore. As far as she was concerned, she had only one daughter. So why now? Why after a decade of silence? Was my name the only one she wanted to say? I sat there, staring at my phone, realizing something terrifying. Whatever was happening in that hospital room, it wasn't just about illness. It was about a truth that had been buried for years. A truth my mother had known and chosen to ignore. And that phone call wasn't an apology. It was a reckoning. Before I tell you what happened when I finally walked into that hospital room, I want you to know this. If you've ever been pushed out of your own family, if you've ever been blamed for something you didn't do, or if you've ever been replaced by a favorite child, you'll understand this story. And if you don't want to miss what comes next, not just in this story, but in others, like it, make sure you subscribe to this channel. These stories stay with you, and sometimes they help you make sense of your own. So let me ask you this. If the person who hurt you the most asked to see you one last time, would you go? Because what I found out that night was something I had waited my whole life to hear. And at the same time, something I wish I never had. And the real truth, the one that changes everything, doesn't even come until much later. Stay with me. Growing up, our house never looked broken from the outside. We lived in a quiet neighborhood, clean yard, lights on every night, a place where people waved when they drove by. But inside that house, there was a difference no one talked about. My sister and I were only 3 years apart, but we lived in two very different worlds. She was louder, more confident, the kind of child adults noticed the moment she walked into a room. I was quieter, the kind of kid who learned early how to stay out of the way. My mother used to say we were just different, but even as a child, I knew that word meant something else. It meant one of us was easier to love. My father died when we were still young. Suddenly, everything changed. My mother leaned on my sister in a way she never leaned on me. They shared long talks in the kitchen after dinner. They laughed together on the couch while I sat nearby, pretending to read. No one told me I didn't belong. No one had to. I learned it in small moments, like when my sister forgot her lunch, and my mother drove it to her school right away. But when I forgot mine, my mother said, "You'll be fine. You're strong." When my sister cried, the house stopped. When I cried, the house went quiet. I learned how to solve my own problems early, how to stay calm, how to not need too much. And my mother seemed to appreciate that. "You don't make things difficult," she once told me. At the time, I thought it was a compliment. As we got older, the difference became more obvious. My sister's choices were explained away. My mistakes were remembered. If she struggled, it was because life was hard on her. If I struggled, it was because I wasn't trying enough. I don't think my mother meant to hurt me. I really don't. She was tired, widowed, trying to hold a family together with one hand while the other was always reaching toward my sister. And I became the child who didn't ask for anything. I was the one who remembered appointments, who paid attention, who noticed things that went unsaid. Every year, on the anniversary of my father's death, I lit a candle in my room, quietly, One year, I mentioned it to my mother. She looked surprised. "I didn't realize you still thought about that," she said. That was the moment something settled inside me. Not anger, not resentment, just understanding. I understood that love doesn't always disappear loudly. Sometimes it fades quietly while you're still standing in the same room. As adults, my sister stayed close to my mother. I moved a little farther away, not physically at first. Emotionally, I still showed up, still helped when asked, still answered the phone. But I stopped expecting fairness. I stopped expecting to be chosen. Because deep down, I believed something I never said out loud. That if my mother ever had to choose between us, I already knew the answer. And I didn't know then how much that belief would cost me later. Because the real damage didn't begin with yelling or betrayal. It began with silence. And silence has a way of preparing you for loss. Long before the loss actually happens. By the time we were adults, the roles in our family were already set. My sister was the one my mother worried about. The one she checked on. The one she defended even when no one was accusing her. I was the one who was fine. That word followed me everywhere. Whenever I asked how my sister was doing, my mother had a long answer. When she asked about me, and I said I was tired or stressed, she would smile and say, "You'll figure it out. You always do." At first, I believed that meant she trusted me. Later, I realized it meant she didn't want to think about me. My sister moved through life like there was always a safety net beneath her. If she quit a job, my mother understood. If she needed help with rent, my mother found a way. When I struggled, I handled it quietly. I took extra shifts. I said no to things I wanted. I learned how to stretch a dollar and swallow disappointment. And every time I helped, my mother would say the same thing. Just this once, but just this once happened again. And again. And again. The biggest moment came a few years later. My sister was in trouble. Serious trouble. She had made a series of bad decisions. Nothing illegal, but close enough to scare everyone involved. There was debt, missed payments, a risk of losing the one thing she had left that looked stable from the outside. My mother called me late one night. Her voice sounded older than I remembered. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't ask if it was a bad time. She went straight to the point. "Your sister needs help," she said. I asked how much. She hesitated. Then she gave me a number that made my stomach drop. It was money I had been saving for myself, for my future, for security I had never been given. I said I needed time to think. There was a pause on the line. "I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important," my mother said. "She's really struggling." I wanted to ask if she had ever noticed when I struggled, but I didn't. Instead, I asked one simple question. "Will I get it back?" My mother didn't answer right away. "She'll pay you back when she can," she said finally. "And I won't forget this. I promise." That promise mattered more to me than the money. So I said yes. I transferred the money the next day. No contract, no witnesses, just trust. For a while, things seemed better. My sister sounded relieved when she thanked me. My mother called more often. She even told me she was proud of me. That should have felt good. But there was something underneath it that made me uneasy, because the praise only came after I gave something up. Months passed. No repayment, no mention of it. When I finally brought it up, my sister laughed it off. "You know I'm good for it," she said. "Why are you making it awkward?" I mentioned it to my mother later. Her tone shifted immediately. "She's under a lot of pressure," she said. "You don't want to add to that, do you?" That was the moment I understood something clearly. In our family, my sister's comfort mattered more than my boundaries. And my role wasn't to be treated fairly. It was to be useful. I didn't know then that this unspoken rule was about to be tested in a way none of us could take back. Because the next thing my sister would do wouldn't just cost me money. It would cost me my place in the family. The call came on an ordinary afternoon. Nothing about that day felt important until my phone rang. It was my mother. Her voice wasn't soft this time. It wasn't tired. It was tight. "Did you do this?" she asked. I didn't know what she was talking about. She didn't explain right away. She didn't need to. My sister had already told her everything, or at least her version of everything. Apparently, money had gone missing. Money connected to the help I had given months earlier. According to my sister, I had pressured her, confused her, taken advantage of the situation. I laughed at first, not because it was funny, because it was impossible. I told my mother there had to be a misunderstanding, that I had records, messages, proof. She cut me off. Why would she lie? My mother asked. That question hit harder than the accusation itself. Why would she lie? I asked my mother if she had actually spoken to my sister, if she had asked any follow-up questions. She's been crying all day, my mother said. She feels betrayed. I felt like I was listening to a story about someone else. I reminded my mother of the transfer, of the promise, of her words. She went quiet. Then she said something I will never forget. I don't recognize you anymore. The conversation ended shortly after that. Not with yelling, not with slammed doors, just distance. The next few days were worse. My messages went unanswered. My calls went to voicemail. When I finally got through, my mother's tone was cold. She told me my sister was devastated, that the stress was affecting her health, that the family didn't need more conflict. I asked if I could come over and talk in person. My mother said no. It's better if we take some space, she said. Space. That word felt harmless, temporary. I thought if I stayed calm, if I waited, things would settle. They didn't. Within weeks, the story had changed. I was no longer someone who had made a mistake. I was someone who had always been difficult, always resentful, always jealous. Things from my childhood were suddenly remembered differently. Moments when I had been quiet were reinterpreted as coldness. Times I had needed help were reframed as manipulation. I didn't recognize myself in the person they described, and I realized something terrifying. The truth wasn't being debated. It was being replaced. I gathered everything I had. Bank statements, messages, dates. I asked my mother to look at them. She refused. I don't want to dig into this anymore, she said. It's hurting your sister. That was the moment I understood. This wasn't about facts. It was about comfort. Believing my sister was easier than admitting she had been wrong. Admitting she had trusted the wrong person. And if someone had to be the villain to keep the family together, it wasn't going to be her. I stopped trying to explain myself after that. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I finally saw that my words didn't matter. In my mother's eyes, a choice had already been made, and no amount of truth could undo it, at least not then. What I didn't know was that this accusation was only the beginning. The real punishment hadn't arrived yet, and when it did, it wouldn't come with an argument. It would come with silence. The silence didn't happen all at once. At first, it came in small pieces. A missed call that was never returned. A message left unread. A holiday that passed without a single word. I told myself my mother just needed time. But time didn't soften anything. It erased me. I found out about family events the way strangers do. Through social media. Through conversations I wasn't part of. Photos appeared online. Smiles. Gatherings. My sister standing next to my mother, arm around her shoulder. I wasn't in any of them. When I asked a relative what was going on, they sounded uncomfortable. Oh, I thought you knew, they said. Knew what? That my mother had told people we were no longer speaking. That it was for the best. That I had chosen to step away. I hadn't chosen anything. I was simply not invited anymore. The final confirmation came months later. A letter arrived in the mail. Official. Cold. It wasn't addressed personally, just legally. My mother had updated her will. I wasn't mentioned. Not as a beneficiary. Not as a contact. Not even as family. I sat at my kitchen table, holding that letter, trying to breathe. I didn't cry right away. I felt embarrassed. Embarrassed that I had believed things could be fixed. That fairness would eventually matter. I thought about calling my mother. Then I realized something. She hadn't even told me herself. She had let paperwork do the talking. That was when I understood this wasn't about punishment. It was about removal. I packed my things not long after that. I didn't leave town in a dramatic way. No final confrontations. No goodbyes. I just stopped being nearby. I moved far enough away that running into them wouldn't happen by accident. I changed my routine, my number, my expectations. And still I waited. Not for an apology, just for acknowledgement. It never came. Years passed. People would ask about my family, and I learned how to answer without explaining. They're doing fine, I'd say. It was easier than saying I had been cut out of my own life. On my birthday, I checked my phone out of habit. Nothing. On holidays, I kept myself busy. Work, errands, anything that made the day pass faster. What hurt the most wasn't the absence of my mother's voice. It was the way she replaced me so easily, as if my sister alone was enough to tell the story of our family. I tried not to think about the will, about what it meant, but late at night, one question always returned. What kind of mother erases her own child without a conversation? I told myself there had to be more to it, that maybe my mother was confused, manipulated, that someday she would realize what she had done. But as each year passed, hope turned into something else. Acceptance. I built walls I never thought I'd need. Not because I hated my mother, but because loving her from a distance was the only way to survive. I didn't know then that the silence I was living in wasn't permanent, that it was only being stored up, waiting. And when it finally broke, it would do so in the most unexpected way. For a long time, I lived as if my family no longer existed. Not because I forgot them, but because thinking about them hurt more than the silence. Years went by. I built a routine that didn't include holidays back home or surprise phone calls. My life became smaller but steadier. And just when I thought the past had settled where it belonged, small things began to surface. It started with a message from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. It was short, awkward. "I don't know if this is my place," it said, "but something feels off about what happened back then." I stared at the screen for a long time before responding. I asked what they meant. They didn't give details, just hints that my sister's stories changed depending on who she was talking to, that timelines didn't always match, that certain explanations felt rehearsed. I told myself not to read too much into it, but once doubt enters your mind, it doesn't leave quietly. A few months later, I ran into an old family friend by chance. We made polite conversation, talked about work, the weather. Then they paused and said something I hadn't expected. "You know, I never understood why your mom blamed you," they said. "It never quite added up." I felt my chest tighten. I asked what they meant. They waved it off. "Oh, nothing. Just a feeling." A feeling. For years, my mother had treated my sister's words as facts, my words as problems. And now, slowly, people who had been on the edges of the situation were starting to question the story. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't ask for explanations. Part of me was afraid that digging into the past would open wounds I had worked hard to close. But another part of me, the part that had been silent for too long, was listening carefully. The biggest moment came from someone I least expected, a relative who had always stayed neutral, someone who didn't take sides. We were talking about something unrelated when they said, almost casually, "You know, your mom was told the truth years ago, right?" I thought I had misheard, told the truth about what I asked. They looked uncomfortable, about the money, about what really happened. My heart started pounding. I asked who told her. They hesitated. "Someone who didn't want to get involved," they said. "But your mom didn't want to hear it." That sentence changed everything, because it meant this wasn't a mistake. It wasn't confusion. It was a choice. My mother had been given a chance to see things clearly, and she had turned away. I went home that night and sat in the dark. I replayed every conversation in my head, every unanswered call, every holiday spent alone. All those years, I believed I had been misunderstood. Now I realized something worse. I had been understood and dismissed. I didn't feel anger right away. I felt grief. Grief for the relationship that could have been saved, for the mother I thought I had, and for the person I had been waiting for validation that was never coming. That night, I made a quiet decision. I stopped hoping for the past to be corrected. If the truth ever came out fully, it wouldn't be because I chased it. It would be because it could no longer stay hidden. And somehow deep down, I knew that moment was coming. I just didn't know it would arrive through a hospital phone call, or how much it would ask of me when it did. After that night, I stopped waiting for something to change. Not because I had given up, but because I finally understood what I was waiting for was never coming. I focused on the life directly in front of me. Work became more than a paycheck. It became structure, something I could control when everything else felt uncertain. I found a rhythm. Early mornings, long days, quiet evenings. No drama, no sudden calls, no expectations. For the first time, my life didn't revolve around whether my mother noticed me. And that felt strange. At first it felt empty, like something important was missing. Then slowly, it felt peaceful. I learned how to make decisions without imagining my mother's reaction. Where to live, how to spend my money, who to keep close. I didn't talk about my family much. When people asked, I gave simple answers. We're not close. I never said why. I wasn't ashamed. I just didn't want to keep explaining pain to people who couldn't fix it. Financially, I became careful. After what happened with my sister, trust didn't come easily. I saved. I planned. I stopped lending things I couldn't afford to lose. Emotionally, I did the same. I let fewer people see the parts of me that had once waited so desperately to be chosen. Something else happened during that time. I started sleeping better. Not perfectly, but better. The constant tension I had carried for years began to ease. I realized how much energy I had spent trying to be understood by someone who had already decided who I was. Letting go of that effort felt like setting down a weight I didn't know I was carrying. There were still moments, of course. Certain songs, certain smells, holidays that came too quickly. On my birthday one year, a card arrived. No return address. Inside, there was no message. Just my name, written in handwriting I recognized immediately. My mother's. I stared at that card for a long time. I didn't call her. I didn't write back. Not out of anger, but because I didn't know what that gesture meant. Was it guilt, habit, regret? Or was it just another way of reaching out without actually saying anything? I placed the card in a drawer and closed it. That was how our relationship existed now. In pieces. Unspoken. Carefully avoided. As the years passed, I built something solid for myself. Nothing flashy, nothing that would impress anyone who valued appearances. But it was mine. I learned that stability doesn't always come from being supported. Sometimes it comes from not being pulled apart anymore. I didn't feel victorious. I felt grounded. And for a while, that was enough. I never imagined my mother was watching from a distance, that she was paying attention in her own quiet way, or that my absence was slowly forcing her to see the space I had left behind. Because when the past finally reached out again, it didn't come with accusations. It came with urgency, and it came when there was no more time to avoid the truth. The call came late in the evening. Not so late that it felt like an emergency. Just late enough to feel wrong. I was home. The television was on, but I wasn't watching it. When my phone rang, I noticed the number wasn't saved. I almost ignored it. Something made me answer. The voice on the other end was calm, professional. They asked if they were speaking to me by full name. I said yes. This is the hospital, they said. Your mother has been admitted. For a moment, I couldn't speak. The word mother didn't feel connected to me anymore. It felt distant, like a title from another life. I asked what had happened. They told me she had collapsed earlier that day, that she was stable for now, but they needed to reach family. I asked why they were calling me. There was a pause. She asked for you, the voice said. She specifically asked that we contact you. Not my sister. Me. I felt my chest tighten. I asked if my sister had been notified. They said they hadn't been able to reach her yet. That made no sense. My sister had always been the first call, the emergency contact, the one who lived closest. I thanked them and hung up. Then I sat there holding my phone, staring at nothing. 10 years of silence pressed down on me all at once. I thought about the last words my mother had said to me, about the will, about being unrecognized. And now suddenly she wanted to see me. I didn't rush to the hospital. I needed time to think. I walked around my apartment, touched familiar things, grounded myself in the present. Part of me felt guilty for hesitating. Another part felt angry. Why now? Why not? When there was time to talk, to ask questions, to repair something. I thought about not going. I told myself she had made her choices, that I didn't owe her anything. But something else kept repeating in my mind. This might be the last time. Not for reconciliation, not for forgiveness, just for truth. I got in my car and drove. The hospital parking lot was nearly empty. The building looked the same as every hospital. Bright lights, automatic doors. Inside, everything smelled clean and cold. I gave my name at the desk. The nurse looked at the screen and nodded. "She's been asking about you," she said. "She seems very focused on seeing you." Focused. That word unsettled me. I followed the nurse down a long hallway. Each step felt heavier than the last. At the door to her room, the nurse stopped. "She's awake," she said, "but she's tired." I nodded. My hand hovered over the door handle. I wasn't sure what I would find on the other side. A fragile woman, a familiar voice, or a stranger. I took a breath and went in. My mother looked smaller than I remembered, paler. Her eyes opened when she heard the door. When she saw me, they filled with something I couldn't name. Relief, fear, regret. She tried to speak, but her voice failed her. I stepped closer. For a long moment, neither of us said anything. Then she whispered my name. Not angrily, not sharply, just my name. And in that moment, I knew. This wasn't a visit. It was a confession waiting to happen. And whatever she was about to say would change how I understood the past forever. I pulled a chair closer to the bed and sat down. For a moment, my mother just looked at me, as if she were afraid that if she blinked, I might disappear again. Her hand moved slightly on the blanket. I reached out and held it. It felt thinner than I remembered. "I didn't think you'd come," she said quietly. I didn't answer right away. "I didn't know if I would," I said. She nodded as if she had expected that. There was a long pause. Then she took a breath that sounded heavier than it should have. "I need to tell you something," she said, "before it's too late." I waited. "I was wrong," she said. The words were soft, almost careful. I didn't react. "I was wrong about what happened back then," she continued. "And I knew it. Sooner than you think." My chest tightened. She looked away, staring at the wall. "Someone came to me," she said, "years ago. They told me what really happened with the money." I felt my grip on her hand tighten slightly. They showed me things she said, messages, dates, enough to make me question everything. I asked the question that had lived in my chest for years. "Then why didn't you call me?" Her eyes filled with tears. "Because I was ashamed," she said. "And because admitting I was wrong meant admitting I had failed you." She swallowed hard. "I had already chosen your sister," she said. "I had already told people you were the problem." She paused, and I didn't know how to undo that without tearing the family apart. I let that sink in. "So you let me disappear instead," I said. She nodded. "I thought, if enough time passed, it wouldn't hurt as much," she said. "I thought you'd move on." I did move on, just not the way she imagined. I asked her about my sister. My mother closed her eyes. "She lied," she said. "At first, I think she was scared. Then it became easier to keep lying than to tell the truth." She opened her eyes again, and I let her, she said, because I didn't want to lose her too. That sentence explained more than anything else she had said. She had been afraid of being alone, and I had been the safer loss. "I watched your life from a distance," she continued. "I asked about you, quietly. I didn't know what to say to that. I saw that you were doing okay, she said. And part of me was relieved, because my survival made her silence easier. I wrote you that card, she said. I didn't know what to say. I thought about the card in my drawer. No message, just my name. I didn't ask you here to forgive me, she said. I know I don't deserve that. She turned her head toward me. I just needed you to know the truth, she said, and to know that I see now what I did to you. Her voice broke. I chose comfort over honesty, she said, and I lost you because of it. I sat there listening, not angry, not relieved, just tired. Years of questions had finally been answered, and somehow that made the weight heavier, because knowing the truth didn't erase the years it took from me. It didn't give me back the holidays, or the phone calls, or the sense of belonging I had learned to live without. My mother squeezed my hand weakly. I don't expect anything from you, she said, but thank you for coming. I nodded, and in that moment, I realized something important. This conversation wasn't the ending. It was only the clearing of the fog. What came next would depend on a choice only I could make. I stayed with my mother until she fell asleep, not because I felt close to her, but because leaving right away felt wrong. When I stepped out into the hallway, the hospital felt quieter than before. I sat there alone, thinking about everything she had said. She had admitted the truth. She had taken responsibility, at least in words. And yet something inside me felt unsettled, because an apology doesn't rewind time. It doesn't give you back the years you spent wondering what was wrong with you. The next morning, my sister arrived. I saw her from a distance talking to the nurse. She looked the same, confident, composed. When she noticed me, she stopped. There was a flicker of surprise in her eyes, then annoyance. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't ask why I was there. She asked one question. Why did they call you? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. She knew. Later that day, my mother woke up again. She looked between us. For the first time, there was no pretending, no softened edges, just reality. I told them, my mother said quietly. I told the truth. My sister's face tightened. She didn't deny it. She didn't apologize. She said something that confirmed everything. I did what I had to do, she said. You would have been fine anyway. That was it. No regret, no shame, just justification. My mother turned her head away. In that moment, I saw something change in her. Not relief, loss. She had spent years protecting the wrong version of the wrong person, and now she had to live with that. A few days later, my mother was discharged. She asked if I would come see her at home. She didn't ask with expectation. She asked carefully. I told her I would think about it. That answer surprised her. It surprised me too. I visited once more before leaving town. She was sitting by the window. She looked older than she had in the hospital, smaller. I don't expect us to go back to how things were, she said. I know that's gone. I appreciated that honesty. I'm not angry anymore, I told her. But I'm also not the same person. She nodded. I know, she said. And I won't ask you to be. We sat in silence for a while. Then she asked one last question. If I had another chance, would you want me in your life? I thought carefully before answering. I don't know what that looks like yet, I said. But it can't be built on guilt or obligation. She accepted that. And for the first time, I felt like she really heard me. I didn't move back. I didn't start calling every week. I didn't step into the role I had once been forced into. But I didn't disappear either. I chose something in between. Distance with honesty, connection without sacrifice. As for my sister, our relationship ended quietly. No confrontation, no closure, just an understanding that some people never change. They only reveal who they've always been. Driving away, I felt something unexpected. Not victory, not sadness, peace. Because the truth had finally come out, and I no longer had to carry it alone. I had been cut off, blamed, erased, but I survived. And in the end, I got the one thing I had waited for all those years. Not an apology, not justice, but clarity. And sometimes, that's enough to let you move forward. As someone who has spent years studying family relationships, I can tell you this. The most painful wounds in a family are rarely caused by anger. They are caused by silence, by avoidance, by choosing comfort over truth. When a parent favors one child, it doesn't always come from cruelty. Often it comes from fear. Fear of being alone, fear of admitting mistakes, fear of facing consequences too late. But favoritism leaves marks that last for decades. The child who is chosen grows up believing they are untouchable. The child who is ignored grows up believing they are replaceable. And both pay a price. What makes this story especially painful is not the betrayal itself. It's the delay. The truth existed for years, but it wasn't spoken until time had already taken too much. And that brings us to something important. Forgiveness does not mean forgetting. It does not mean returning to old roles. And it does not mean sacrificing yourself again to keep the peace. Forgiveness, when it's real, is about releasing the burden of carrying someone else's choices. In this story, healing did not come from an apology alone. It came from clarity, from finally understanding that the pain was never imagined, never exaggerated. If you're listening to this and recognizing your own life in these words, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not wrong for wanting fairness. You are not selfish for protecting yourself. And you are not heartless for choosing distance when closeness costs too much. Some relationships can be rebuilt. Some can only be redefined. And some can only be understood, then released. And that is not failure. That is growth. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to like this video. It helps these stories reach people who may need them more than they realize. And if you want to continue exploring real emotional family stories, like this, stories about truth, karma, and healing, consider subscribing to this channel. New stories are added regularly, and each one carries a lesson worth sitting with. Thank you for listening. And remember, understanding your past is not about reopening wounds. It's about finally letting them rest.